Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Emily Rao. Glad to have you with us on this Friday. Today on the show, that exclusive interview with ABC News. Michael Cohen sitting down with our George Stephanopoulos, what he says about just how much President Trump knew about the hush money payments, plus tragedy at the border. We'll take you there for the story. A 7-year-old girl died in U.S. custody, and we'll also be going to France, where police shot and killed the suspected gunman in that Christmas market shooting. We'll get you up to speed on all of those stories and much more. But first, your headlines.
And Starbucks has something new on its menu, expanded delivery service.
When I was a young man and looking for a voice to tell my stories, well, I chose my father's voice. My father was my hero and my greatest foe.
After shattering Broadway records, a Tony Award, millions in ticket sales, and hundreds of shows, Bruce Springsteen's one-man show Springsteen on Broadway is wrapping up its epic 14-month run this weekend. But it's not over today. Springsteen dropped a full audio version of the show on Spotify. Then just hours after the boss takes his final bow, the show will hit Netflix.
And we start this morning with that exclusive interview. George Stephanopoulos sitting down with Michael Cohen just a day after he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Take a look.
He said in the tweets, he repeated in an interview later on, that basically he says, his claim, you're lying about him to protect your wife, to protect your father-in-law.
Inaccurate. He knows the truth. I know the truth. Others know the truth. And here is the truth. The people of the United States of America, the people of the world, don't believe what he's saying. The man doesn't tell the truth. And it's sad that I should take responsibility for his dirty deeds.
You lied for him for a long time.
More than 10 years.
Why?
Out of loyalty. Out of loyalty to him. I followed a bad path, and hence how we started this conversation. I have my freedom, and I will not be the villain, as I told you once before. I will not be the villain of his story.
He's saying very clearly that he never directed you to do anything wrong. Is that true?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. First of all, nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me, as I said in my allocution, and I said as well in the plea, he directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal, which was really between him and David Pecker, and then David Pecker's counsel. I just reviewed the documents in order to protect him. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
And he was doing that to help his election?
You have to remember at what point in time that this matter came about, 2 weeks or so before the election, post the Billy Bush comments. So yes, he was very concerned about how this would affect the election.
To help his campaign.
To help him and the campaign.
An incredible interview there. Michael Cohen so strong in his allegations against the president. A lot to break down here, but we have a team to help us do it. Lana Zach is joining us from the White House, and Aaron Katersky once again here in New York. And Aaron, I want to start with you. What was your biggest takeaway from this interview?
I think it was striking just to see him sitting there right after getting sentenced to 3 years in prison. He'll have to report on March 6th. And to see someone who was once so close to Donald Trump. His office was, 20 feet away from Trump's in Trump Tower. And someone who over the years would upbraid a reporter whose story he didn't like, or if a deal needed to be negotiated, he'd do that. If payments to women were required, he would do that. Just to see him now fully turning away from someone for whom he once said he would take a bullet was striking. And then I think, Emily, to hear him verbalize what until now had been largely confined to court documents, to hear Cohen implicate President Trump in a campaign finance crime, to say that it was Trump who directed him to pay off alleged mistresses for their silence because he worried about the implications for his campaign. That, I think, was also striking to hear it in Cohen's own words.
It's one thing to see it on those court documents and read it, Aaron, but to actually have him sitting there in the chair and talking about it, just unbelievable. And Lana, we know the president usually does not stay quiet for very long when he feels like he's being criticized. So far, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm not seeing any tweets, no statements. What's the reaction from the White House there?
Well, we are not hearing from the president yet in response to that exclusive interview with George Stephanopoulos. We did just hear from the deputy White House press secretary, who says that we should not, in the media, be giving credence to someone who's a convicted, self-admitted liar. Of course, there are other documents and other supporting evidence that is buttressing Cohen's case that the president did, in fact, know about it, including those court documents that we read with AMI, the publisher of the National Enquirer, which said very clearly that they had entered into an agreement with the Trump organization to be reimbursed for the payments made to silence Karen McDougal. So while it is true that Cohen has said he is a liar, that's what the White House is really pointing out, but we're not hearing very much from the president himself. And I'm just looking right now to see if he's in the West Wing, and he hasn't arrived in the West Wing yet today. So we'll be watching to see, of course, when the president does have something to say, what he's going to do and how he's going to respond to this. Because, he said previously in an interview with Fox News, I never directed him, Michael Cohen, to do anything wrong. Whatever he did on his own. He's a lawyer, and he makes the case that as a lawyer, Michael Cohen should have kept him on the right side of the law. Obviously, that didn't happen in Cohen's case, self-admitting to in that guilty plea. But it still remains to be seen how much the president was actually involved, Emily.
Yeah, and Lana, just to think that he is in the residence portion of the White House right behind you, which we can see where you're reporting from. You got to think, what is he doing? Is he thinking about tweeting? What's he thinking right now? And,
right.
Has he watched this entire interview? Thank you very much, Lana. And Aaron, we also want to know where really we go from here. What's next for both the president in handling this situation and for Michael Cohen?
Well, Cohen has 3 months now to prepare for his time in federal prison. And in the meantime, as George asked him if there's more for him to say, he said he would do it. Now, we're not sure that there's any more the special counsel needs from him. That he was sentenced is a signal that special counsel Robert Mueller is done with Cohen. But when George said if he would have more cooperation in him, he said sure. And I think that was the key point of the interview. Michael Cohen came to the chair clearly intending to have something he felt he needed to say. Chief, among those things, that he disagreed with the president, that he did not plead guilty because he wanted to embarrass him or because he was trying to protect his in-laws or because of any other reason other than he knew what he did was wrong, and Cohen said he's angry at himself for it. And the other thing I think that was clear is that he wasn't going to talk about certain things, and we knew that going in, that because of the ongoing investigations, both the special counsel and in the Southern District of New York, Cohen said that he would limit his comments to George, and he said he didn't want to jeopardize any of the ongoing investigations.
Fascinating, Aaron. And to your point, it seemed so personal. The tweets from the president and just the way that Michael Cohen answered some of those questions, you can tell. And Lana, let's go back to you for a second, because I'm curious if you get that sense just from being in the White House. How are people there today? What are the staff, the vibe there from the White House?
Well, it really is extraordinarily personal between these two men. Aaron referenced that the president had previously said that Cohen was making a plea deal in order just to embarrass the president. Cohen took that on directly, saying it's absolutely not true. I did not wish to embarrass the president. He knows the truth. And he also had one final piece of advice for his former boss. Take a listen.
Lay off Twitter. Run the country the way that we all thought that you would. Be able to take the Democrats, Republicans, bring them together and bring the country together instead of dividing the country.
Definitely something that we'll be watching for here, particularly as Democrats gain control of the House of Representatives next month. Emily?
All right, thanks a lot, Lana. He's saying lay off the Twitter, but I've got the phone alert ready because I have a feeling, yep, that might not happen. All right, thank you so much, Lana Zach at the White House and Aaron Katursky here in New York. And we want to turn now to a tragic story from the border where a 7-year-old, a little girl, has died after she was in U.S. custody. She crossed over the border illegally with her father. Let's go to Marcus Moore, who is in Texas. You've covered this story so extensively, Marcus. How did this even happen?
Well, Emily, good morning. Good to be with you. There are so many questions this morning about how this happened. And right now, we don't have a lot of details, but we do know this. According to DHS, this little girl, 7 years old, was from Guatemala. And on December 6th of last week, she was with her father and about 160 others when they were detained after illegally crossing into the U.S. And the information we have is that Customs and Border Protection had this little girl and her father in custody for about 8 hours. And it was at one point during that time that this girl began having seizures. And a medical team was called in to check on her and to see what kind of treatment she may have needed. And they determined that she had a fever of 105.7. And it was at that point that she was taken by ambulance to a hospital in El Paso, and she went into cardiac arrest at that point. And sadly, within 24 hours of that, she passed away. Those are the details as we know them right now. It's important to point out that typically when someone is taken into custody, they do have access to medical treatment, and they are supposed to be treated medically. So, Emily, so many questions this morning about how exactly this young girl became so ill and how she eventually passed away at a hospital.
And Marcus, I'm watching the reaction come in from this story on Twitter, on social media. So many people are outraged, so emotional about this story. I wonder, you know, with growing calls to change the way DHS operates there, Customs and Border Patrol, if that needs more oversight, something needs to happen. But it also seemed to be the reaction from some of those agencies is, look, we have said time and again that it's dangerous. If you bring your child to this situation, it's not a safe one. Can you talk a little bit more about their reaction, what they are saying about
Absolutely.
all this backlash?
That's right, Emily. They have said that in the past, and they said it in a statement they released recently in regards to this incident. In fact, if we can put it up, they said in part that, number one, unfortunately, despite our efforts and best efforts of the medical team treating the child, we were unable to stop this tragedy from occurring. Once again, we are begging parents to not put themselves or their children at risk of attempting to enter illegally. And that is a part of what the Department of Homeland Security has said, and they also extended their condolences to the family and say they empathize with any father or mother who loses a child. But Emily, you bring up a very good point. There has been a push to try to prevent families from making the decision to join in on this trek because it is dangerous just by the terrain alone. And we heard, based on reporting, that this young girl who passed away, again, 7 years old, reportedly had not eaten or had anything to drink for several days. I also want to point out for you what the ACLU has said. They released a statement in responding to this. And they say, quote, when the Trump administration pushes for the militarization of the border, including more border wall construction, they are driving people fleeing violence into the deadliest desert regions. And so they say this is an example of what the rhetoric and the policy, the policies that the Trump administration is seeking, that it is causing people to put themselves in these dangerous situations. Because, Emily, as I have seen in my time in the border with the migrant caravan and on the U.S.-Mexico border, people are desperate. And they are willing, because of the violence in their native countries and because of the lack of economic opportunities, they will put themselves and their children in these dangerous situations. So you get a sense of the desperation they are feeling, but certainly no one wants to see what apparently happened or what happened on December 6th, that a 7-year-old girl, a defenseless girl, passed away.
And Marcus, I think people trying to make that point that if Yes, don't bring your children to that situation, but if you try to put yourself in that perspective of how desperate do you have to be to go to a place where you could potentially be without food, water, 4 days at a time, waiting to try to get into the country. Strong opinions on both sides of this for sure, but certainly just a tragic story. Marcus Moore in Texas, our thanks to you for help covering this story. And we want to move on now to some international news in France, where Ian Panel has been following the story after that Christmas market shooting. The suspected gunman has now been killed after a standoff with police. Let's get the very latest from Ian Panel.
Well, the Strasbourg Christmas market has just opened. As you can see, armed police are patrolling through the area just to make sure that everyone is safe. This is the first time since that terror attack that it has opened. Let's just go over first of all and show you the positive side of what's going on at the moment. See here these three young women having their photos taken. Locals and tourists are back out. I don't know if you can make out the sign next to it with a little red archway. What it says is Strasbourg, capital of Christmas, Capitale de Noël, and look at that giant Christmas tree. That's what the city is famous for, this beautiful medieval architecture, the Christmas market. Almost 2 million visitors a year come here. We just had an update from the public prosecutor about the case. What we now understand happened last night was that there were 3 policemen in a car on patrol going down in the Neudorf district. This is south of the capital here in Strasbourg. They spotted a man walking along the street who matched the description of the suspect. As he saw them, he went towards a door to mimic going inside the building, but they spotted that he didn't have a key. At that point, he turned round, raised his pistol and shot at them. They're saying it was the same pistol that was used in the terror attack here in the centre of Strasbourg. They returned fire and they killed him. They've been combing the scene. They're checking for accomplices. Let's wander over a little bit. But for now, they don't think there were any other accomplices, although they did take some members of his family into custody. I think the fact that when he was wounded on the night of the attack, the fact that he'd gone back to his neighbourhood, he essentially hijacked a taxi and told the taxi driver that's what he was doing, indicates that perhaps he wasn't part of a wider network, but the police are continuing their investigation. And they also want to know, in that 48 hours between the attack and him being killed, where was he? Did anybody help him? And that's centrepiece of their investigation. I'd just like to turn to some of the people who were in the market at the time, who've now just reopened their stalls. Hello there, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
First of all, let's have a look at these wonderful wooden artifacts that are being sold here. Traditional Christmas scenes.
Everything
You have
is
a major
olive wood, and we bought it in Bethlehem.
You bought it in Bethlehem?
Yes, in March.
Oh, wow, okay. I've been to Bethlehem. It's a beautiful, beautiful city.
Yes.
So you were here on the night of the attack, correct?
Yes.
Can you describe what it was like?
Yes, I was going to close because it's closing at 8, but at 10 to 8 we heard a big shooting and a lot of people were running afraid, so we were afraid too.
Were all 4 of you
I
here?
was with her.
Right, okay.
We were only 2. But so we tried to close, we couldn't close, and someone helped us to close. And afterwards,
you stayed inside the hut during this whole incident?
Yes. At the we closed, and then we hide. We hide, and we were very, very afraid because we stopped the light, and so stopped also the heating stuff. So it was very cold.
And it's really cold in Strasbourg.
Yes. And then when you heard and you don't see, it's worse. Huh? And we didn't feel safe because the wood it's not.
It won't protect you if someone's shooting. Yeah. Okay. So what is your reaction to the news that the killer has now been killed and you can reopen the market?
Yes. We are happy that it's over because it was quite frightening to think he could come again, and we are sad for Strasbourg if it stay closed, So now it's open, everything will start again, and we hope the spirit of Christmas will go on.
I couldn't say it any better myself. We hope the spirit of Christmas will go on. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all smiling there, enjoying the van show. This is hot wine, I think. Oh no, it's hot orange juice. Well, it smells really good. It smells very, very Christmassy. I can't put it better than that myself. People are really happy here. They're relieved. They can get back to business, get back to enjoying the holiday season. For ABC News Live, I'm Ian Panel in Strasbourg, France.
And our thanks to Ian Panel. Always bittersweet when you see those folks go back to the site of a terrorist attack, but as they said, the Christmas spirit will live on. Great update there. And we turn now back to the U.S. and the weather system. So much wet weather really affecting millions of Americans, and it will continue into the weekend. Let's get the latest from Ginger Z.
Emily, thank you. How about we go ahead and get into the weekend forecast, because it's an important one. There's a lot going on, and the storm is in Texas, circulating counterclockwise as it does. And on the back side of it, where it pulls in the cold air, it dropped up to 7 inches of snow in west central Texas. So Sweetwater is the video you're seeing there. Then you have the front side of it, which is rain and flash flooding, and that's still a possibility today. But even Little Rock had a daily record more than 4 inches of rain. Oklahoma City had the thunderstorms, and thunderstorms will be part of this too, but today the thunderstorm threat becomes severe in parts of Florida. So if you're in Jacksonville or you're down the coast there, Daytona, Tampa, Orlando, all included in what could be a damaging wind situation as that line comes through and the cold front moves in. And then you have the heavy rains up into the southeast, coastal southeast, the mid-Atlantic, and eventually northeast. I mean, look at the timing there. By Sunday afternoon and evening, it's a wet from the coast, but then frozen precipitation in interior New England. Up to 4 inches of rain, that could help places like Raleigh, even if they only get a little 1.2 short of what their wettest year on record. Washington, D.C. tonight into early Saturday could break their wettest year on record. So a really wet pattern ahead, as so much of the East has been. Emily?
All right, thanks a lot, Ginger. And that's going to do it for today's debrief. A couple reminders for you before we go. Number one, join us for the briefing room. That's at 3:30 this afternoon. Also, World News Prime, that's coming up at 8. And of course, be sure to download the ABC News app for those breaking news alerts. You can be the first one to hear when President Trump responds to this latest Cohen interview. And we have one more treat before we go. A really stunning inside look at the latest installment of the Star Wars movie, how the visual artists combine live action scenes and their computer-generated graphics to really make it magical. I want to show you that inside look. I promise you'll enjoy it, even if you're not a Star Wars pro like me. Enjoy.
Solo. Approved. We'll have you flying in no time.
Your empire needs you! Solo, get up! We're almost there! Almost where? Wait! Wait!
Whoa, is that a Wookiee? Incredible. I'm telling you, you will never have a deeper sleep than curled up in a Wookiee's lap.